Autumn 1944. The Ardennes forest, frozen to its very core. The air, thick and cold, smells of wet pine needles, gunpowder, and burnt steel. Every breath turns into a cloud of vapor that instantly melts in the gray, indifferent light. Near a shattered road, frozen into the mud, stands what was, just this morning, an American M18 Hellcat tank destroyer. Its thin armor is pierced in several places and twisted outwards like cardboard. From the open turret, resembling a gaping wound, a thin wisp of smoke still curls. 3 men stand around it, German tankers, veterans whose faces are weathered by the Russian steppes and French fields. They smoke unhurriedly, lazily releasing smoke, and look at the knocked-out machine with open contempt. One of them, a non-commissioned officer with an iron cross on his worn tunic, spits on the ground and smirks. "A Ronson-lighter," he says, repeating a popular joke in the army about American tanks, "lights up on the first try." The second, a very young guy, kicks the track with his boot. "This isn't even a tank, it's a tourist convertible. Were they planning a picnic?" The third, the oldest, silently circles the machine, rapping his knuckles on the armor. The sound is dull, almost tinny. He shakes his head. 12 millimeters, he says, deliberately, as if tasting the number. "My armored car has thicker protection. Just a cardboard box for suicides." They laughed, loudly, confidently, with a sense of complete superiority. With the laughter of those who sit inside the 80-millimeter thick armor of a Panther. With the laughter of those who had seen their 88-millimeter guns turn any Allied vehicle into a flaming torch from a mile away. They looked at this absurd, ugly M18 and saw in it the whole essence of the American Army. Naive, weak, pampered. They didn't know they were looking into the face of their own demise. They didn't understand they were seeing the weapon of the end. Because here is the paradox that still sends shivers down my spine. This cardboard box, this lighter, this tourist convertible, destroyed more German tanks than any other American tank destroyer in the entire war. The official statistics of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion alone, armed with these machines, state 57 destroyed Panthers and Tigers, 17 self-propelled guns. The losses? Only 17 Hellcats. This was a loss ratio that broke all the logic of tank warfare. 2 years later, they weren't laughing anymore. A year later, their laughter froze on their lips. And then, in the snows of the Ardennes, they themselves froze. So what happened? What devilish anomaly was hidden in this ridiculous machine? 95% of German tankers, upon first encountering it, made the same fatal mistake. They saw the thin armor and considered it an easy prey. They didn't understand the main thing. They didn't understand they weren't fighting a tank. They were fighting mathematics. German genius created the Tiger, a 57-ton work of art, an engineering masterpiece that required 300,000 man-hours to assemble. It was feared, admired, turned into a myth. The Americans, however, created the M18, a machine that was assembled at a Buick car factory in a few thousand hours. This wasn't a duel between 2 knights in shining armor. It was a battle of 1 knight against 1,000 wasps, stinging from all sides. Beauty versus quantity, genius versus the machine tool. This machine shouldn't have existed. Its armor, which could be pierced even by a heavy DSK machine gun, was a mockery of crew safety. Its open turret made the soldiers defenseless against any grenade, any shrapnel from an artillery shell. By all the laws of war, the 5-man crew inside was on a suicide mission. And the first months of the war confirmed this. But then something changed. A shift occurred that the German command refused to acknowledge until the very end. A secret they tried to hide even from their own soldiers to avoid panic. So how did this mockery, this compromise on tracks, this mass grave for 5 become the most effective American tank destroyer in history? What diabolical secret was hidden behind that thin armor? A secret the German generals understood far too late.
To find the answer, we must return to where it all began, to the place where this ugly duckling was born. And you'll be shocked to learn that its creators weren't even thinking about fighting tigers. They were thinking about speed, and only about speed. To understand how this monster was born, you need to understand one thing that 99% of people overlook when talking about World War II. American generals weren't trying to build a tank to defeat a German tank. It sounds insane, but therein lies the key. It's a contradiction that will change your perception of that war. While German engineers were obsessively increasing armor thickness and cannon caliber, creating invincible steel knights, the American command was looking in another direction. They saw the future not in armor, but in speed. It all started with panic. 1940. German tank wedges, the famous armored corps, are slicing through France like a hot knife through butter. It was a new kind of war, a war of speed, a blitzkrieg. Old defensive doctrines were crumbling before their eyes. The Allies were terrified. How do you stop this steel avalanche that doesn't engage in long battles, but simply flows around fortifications and races towards the capitals? A man named Leslie McNair found the answer, a general whose philosophy would define the American army for years to come. And his philosophy was frighteningly simple. It consisted of 3 words: seek, strike, destroy. McNair believed that creating heavy, slow tanks for duels with other tanks was a path to nowhere. It was like building fortresses to catch the wind. He proposed a radical idea: to create a separate class of vehicles. Not tanks, but tank destroyers. Light, super fast with a powerful gun. Their job wasn't to take a hit. Their job was to be where they weren't expected, to roam the battlefield like a pack of wolves, attacking enemy tank columns from the flanks and rear, striking and disappearing before the enemy could turn its heavy turrets. It was a doctrine of ambush, a doctrine of speed, a doctrine of asymmetrical warfare. The first attempt to birth such a beast resulted in a compromise. The M10 Wolverine came into being. Not a bad machine, but it was built on the chassis of a Sherman medium tank. That was its death sentence. It weighed almost 30 tons and could only manage 48 kilometers per hour on a highway. Too slow, too heavy. The Wolverine was a good soldier, but it wasn't the predator McNair dreamed of. The Army needed something completely different, something no one had ever built before. And then, in 1942, the order went to the most unexpected place, not to a tank factory,
but to the design bureau of the automotive giant General Motors in the Buick division. And the project was headed by a man who was a legend, but in a completely different field. His name was Harley Earl. He was a genius of automotive design, the man who gave America its dream on wheels: tail fins, chrome, the elegant curves of Cadillacs and Chevrolets. And this artist, this poet of automotive lines, was tasked with creating the ugliest and deadliest machine in the company's history. The fact that he understood the task better in 5 minutes than tank engineers had in 5 years is still astounding. The prototype, designated T-70, was the quintessence of McNair's doctrine taken to an absurd extreme. When the engineers showed the blueprints to the military, they couldn't believe their eyes at first. This was the most important video of their lives, one that could either bury the idea or raise it to the pinnacle. Let's just look at the numbers. These numbers are a death sentence. Frontal armor, 12.7 millimeters. Let me repeat, 12.7 millimeters. That's the thickness of your finger. A bullet from a Soviet anti-tank rifle would go straight through it. A heavy DSK machine gun would turn this armor into a sieve. For comparison, the frontal armor of a German Panther was 80 millimeters, and a Tiger's was 102 millimeters. The difference isn't in percentages, it's in orders of magnitude. Weight, 17.7 tons. A German Panther weighed 45 tons, a Tiger 57 tons. The Hellcat was 3 times lighter. It wasn't a tank, it was a ghost next to these leviathans. And the cherry on top, the turret. It was open from the top, completely.
Any stone thrown from above, any grenade, any shrapnel from a nearby exploding artillery shell, all of it flew directly onto the crew's heads. The soldiers were defenseless against rain, snow, and death from above. 95% of experts declared in unison, this is not a combat vehicle. This is a mass grave on tracks designed for 5 people. The first tests confirmed the worst fears. The prototype was unstable. The Christie suspension system, which was initially installed, couldn't handle the loads at high speed. When firing on the move, the shell went anywhere but the target. Even the Allies, the British, upon seeing this marvel, smiled politely and twirled a finger at their temple. In their reports, the T-70 was referred to as a sports car with a cannon. Mockery was in every word. The project was hanging by a thread. It seemed one more push and it would be shut down forever, burying the very idea of a super-light tank destroyer along with it. But then something happened that is hidden from most history buffs. 1 hour that is worth a whole year of research. The Buick engineers made a brilliant move. They abandoned the Christie suspension and made a technological breakthrough. They installed an individual torsion bar suspension for each road wheel. I won't bore you with the technical details. I'll just say one thing. It changed everything. The machine gained incredible smoothness of ride. Now it could race across rough terrain at 70 to 80 kilometers per hour and conduct accurate fire. Imagine a race car that has learned to shoot on the run. And under this thin armor beat a fiery heart. A Wright R975 Whirlwind radial engine with 400 horsepower. The same kind was used in many airplanes. It gave this 17-ton ugly duckling a power-to-weight ratio of 22 horsepower per ton. The Tiger's ratio was 12.
The Panther's was 15. This meant the Hellcat could accelerate up to 92 kilometers per hour on a highway. 92 kilometers per hour. In 1943, it was the fastest production armored vehicle of World War II. Nothing else even came close to these figures. And that's when the military fell silent. They saw not an ugly duckling, they saw a predator. They understood that this machine was not supposed to withstand a hit, it was supposed to deliver the first one and disappear. Its armor was its speed, its protection was its absence from the line of fire. In October 1943, the T-70 prototype was officially adopted into service under the designation M18 Hellcat. But it's one thing to create a successful prototype, it's quite another to build thousands of them. Nobody knew that the main ace up this machine's sleeve was not its speed or its gun. The main ace was hidden in the name of the factory where it was assembled, General Motors. They didn't bet on armor, they bet everything on the assembly line. And that bet would either crush them or crush the Third Reich. And this is where the story takes a turn that still makes my heart stop, because war is not just the battlefield, it's mathematics. And while Harley Earl's engineers were creating a predator, elsewhere in the quiet of offices, other people were preparing its cage. Or rather, not a cage, but an endless assembly line. The secret that would change the industry of war was hidden not in steel, but in the production plan. When the M18 Hellcat was adopted, the main question arose: how to produce it, fast, cheap, and in unthinkable quantities. And the answer was found: the Buick factory in Flint, Michigan. Yesterday, elegant family sedans, a symbol of the American dream, rolled off its assembly lines. In 24 hours, you will see the result, and that result was shocking. The government didn't build a new tank factory from scratch, it simply converted an old one. Imagine this: huge workshops that yesterday smelled of fresh paint and expensive leather now smelled of hot metal and weapon grease. The lines along which future roadmasters and centuries glided smoothly were torn out by the roots. In their place stood lathes, presses, and welding machines. The people who yesterday were installing chrome radiator grills were now mounting 76mm cannons.
This was not just a change in production, it was a change in civilizational paradigm. America was turning its main weapon, mass production, into a real weapon of war. And now, prepare to be amazed, because the numbers I'm about to give you explain the outcome of World War II better than hundreds of books on strategy. To build one Tiger tank, a masterpiece of German engineering, required about 300,000 man-hours. 300,000 hours! It was almost manual labor. Every part was fitted by highly skilled craftsmen. The Tiger was not just a tank, it was a sculpture of steel, a work of art, expensive, complex, and capricious. During the entire war, the Germans managed to produce only 1,347 Tigers. And now, America. The Buick factory in Flint, running 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The assembly line never stopped for a minute. It didn't just hum, it sang a hymn to industrial power. A new M18 Hellcat rolled off this assembly line every few hours. By October 1944, in just a year and a half, this one factory alone had produced 2,507 of these machines, almost twice as many as the Tigers produced during the entire war.
The Germans built masterpieces. The Americans stamped out death sentences. 10 years of industrial research were invested in this single assembly line. All the power of Fordism, all the genius of the conveyor belt, all the American obsession with efficiency was focused on one point. This was not a tank. It was an industrial standard. Its modular design allowed it to be assembled like a Lego set. The engine and transmission were combined into a single unit. If the engine failed in battle, it wasn't repaired for weeks in field workshops like on the German Panthers. It was simply taken out whole and replaced in a few hours with a new one that was already waiting in a warehouse. This was an approach that broke German logic. A German tank was a work of art, and its loss was a tragedy. An American Hellcat was an expendable item. Effective, deadly, but expendable. Its crew was more valuable than the machine. If the tank was knocked out, the crew's job was to survive and get a new one, tomorrow, straight from the assembly line. But building thousands of machines is only half the battle. They needed to be transported across the ocean, brought to the front, and supplied with fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. And here, America deployed its second secret weapon, one the Germans didn't even suspect: logistics. The supply system deployed by the Allies in Europe was called the Red Ball Express. It was an artery through which the blood of war flowed in a continuous stream. Nearly 6,000 trucks operating day and night on dedicated roads from the ports of Normandy to the very front line. At peak times, 12,500 tons of cargo were transported daily on this highway. It was an assembly line stretching for hundreds of kilometers. And here is another contrast that gives you goosebumps. While a German Tiger crew was sharing the last can of gasoline, measuring the kilometers to the next refueling, American tankers from the 705th Battalion sometimes drained gasoline from the tanks of their Hellcats because the smell kept them from sleeping. There was too much of it. Fuel was not a problem. Spare parts were not a problem. New tanks were not a problem. The only problem was finding enough German tanks to destroy. A German general, captured in the Ardennes, looking at the endless columns of American trucks, said a phrase that went down in history. "I always thought we were fighting the American army. Only now do I realize we are fighting American factories." He was right. The Hellcat was not just a machine. It was an avatar of this industrial civilization. Every part, every bolt, every track link screamed it. German genius created the world's best tank, but the American system created a machine that would kill it. Not because it was stronger, but because it was always where it needed to be. And there were always more of them. Now imagine the shock of a German veteran. He is sitting in his 57-ton Fortress, in his Tiger. He has just destroyed one of those ridiculous American tin cans. He feels like a winner. But an hour later, 3 more appear from behind the same hill. He destroys one. 5 more appear.
He burns them too, but he runs out of shells. And they just keep coming. An endless, relentless steel tide. What must a person feel in that moment? Not fear. Hatred. Helplessness. He understands that his personal courage, his skill, even the genius of his tank, none of it matters. He has not encountered an army. He has encountered statistics.
And the statistics were not on his side. December 1944. Snow. Thick, heavy, it covered the Ardennes in a shroud, muffling sounds and freezing time. Inside the Panther, it was almost warm. A second lieutenant, an Eastern Front veteran, watched the white silence through his periscope. He was calm. His Panther was the best medium tank in the world. Its 75mm gun with a .70 caliber barrel turned American Shermans into flaming coffins from 2 kilometers away. He knew his machine. He knew the enemy. He was confident of victory. And then he saw it. From behind a snow-covered grove, moving with a ridiculous, almost cartoonish speed, out popped this thing. Low, squat, with an open turret from which the heads of the crew and their helmets protruded. The officer blinked. He had seen them knocked out on roadsides before. An M18, a Hellcat, a tin can. Target, tank destroyer. Range, 1200, he commanded in a steady voice. There was not a hint of doubt in his voice. This was not a duel. It was an execution. 10 seconds that decide everything. For the American, those 10 seconds were already up. The gunner smoothly traversed the barrel. Target locked. Fire! The Panther shuddered, spitting out an 8-kilogram armor-piercing shell at nearly 1,000 meters per second. The snow in front of the gun erupted in a white fountain. The officer kept his eyes glued to the periscope, expecting to see a fireball where the American machine had been. But there was no fireball. The Hellcat, as if sensing the shot, swerved aside like a race car and, kicking up tons of snow with its tracks, disappeared behind a hill. It was moving so fast that the gunner simply couldn't have traversed the turret in time. "Miss," the gunner stated, a note of bewilderment in his voice. The officer was silent. An unpleasant feeling stirred inside him. Something was wrong. This wasn't by the rules. Tanks weren't supposed to move like that. It was dishonorable. This was not the tactic of a warrior, but the trick of a coward. "Forward," he ordered the driver. "We'll flank them. We'll crush this tin can." The 45-ton Panther crawled forward, heavily but steadily, carving a deep track in the snow. They rounded the hill, expecting to see the fleeing enemy. And then I was shocked by the result, because they didn't see one. There were 3 of them. They popped out from 3 different directions, like a pack of wolves surrounding a bear. Their 76mm guns couldn't penetrate the Panther's frontal armor. They knew that, and they didn't even try. The first shell hit the side, ricocheting off the sloped armor with a screech. The second blew off a track, sending the Panther into an awkward spin. The third pierced the thin armor above the engine compartment. The machine shuddered. Black, greasy smoke poured from the rear. The engine sputtered and died. In a few seconds, his perfect fortress, his invincible little tiger, had turned into an immobile metal box. "Traverse the turret! Fire at the one on the right!" the officer screamed, but it was too late. The Hellcats didn't wait for return fire. They did something that the German tanker's mind couldn't comprehend. After firing 2 or 3 shots each, they immediately reversed and, reaching a monstrous speed, vanished into the blizzard as quickly as they had appeared. The entire attack took less than a minute. 1 minute a day for drastic changes. For the officer's crew, this change was fatal. In the reports of the 12th SS Panzer Division, this phenomenon would later be called the mosquito swarm, or the devil's carousel. It was a tactic not taught in any tank academy in the world. It was simple, brutal, and incredibly effective. The Hellcats, using their phenomenal speed, never engaged in a fair fight. They pounced on heavy German tanks like a pack of hyenas. One would distract, firing at the front to make the turret turn.
The other two would then come from the flanks and rear, riddling the vulnerable spots. Sides, rear, engine, tracks. They delivered dozens of blows, immobilized the victim, and then coldly finished it off. This was not war. This was extermination. And now let's move a few kilometers from this battlefield to a German field workshop. A mechanic, his fingers frostbitten, has been trying to repair a damaged transmission on a Tiger for 2 weeks. He's waiting for a spare part from Germany that may never arrive because of the bombed-out railways. Every tank is worth its weight in gold. Its loss is a tragedy. And here's a scene from the American rear. The crew of a knocked-out Hellcat who survived because the open turret allowed them to instantly abandon the burning vehicle are drinking hot coffee in a headquarters tent. Their M18 burned up? So what? 2 hours later, a new one is brought to them, straight off the ship, still smelling of factory paint, with a full tank of gas and a full load of ammunition. For them, the loss of a machine is just an annoying delay in their work. This is information that is worth millions. German General Heinz Guderian, the founding father of the Tank Corps, wrote in his memoirs, "We were faced with an enemy who did not count his losses in equipment. He simply replaced it with new equipment at a speed that seemed fantastic to us." In the diary of an officer from the Greater Germany Division, there is an entry that exudes hopelessness. "Today we burned 7 American tank destroyers. We lost 1 Panther. By all the laws of tactics, this is our victory. But tomorrow, 15 will appear in place of those 7, and our Panther will only be replaced in a month, if it is replaced at all. We are winning every battle, but we feel we are losing the war. It's driving us mad. We are fighting a hydra that grows 2 heads for every one we cut off." They laughed. Then they fell silent. Then they began to be afraid. The fear was not caused by the enemy's strength, but by its ubiquity. Hellcats were everywhere. They set up ambushes on roads. They conducted deep raids into the rear, destroying depots and headquarters. They appeared where by all calculations they could not be. A speed of 90 kilometers per hour allowed them to cover a distance in an hour that took a German tank column a whole day. The officer survived. After escaping the burning Panther, he and his crew trudged through deep snow for several hours to reach their lines. When he got to headquarters and reported what had happened, a colonel, a gray-haired veteran, looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Get used to it, son. This is their new tactic. We don't know how to fight it." At that moment, the officer realized a terrible thing. He realized that his enemy was not the guy in the American helmet. His enemy was an invisible, faceless monster. It was not a tank. It was a mass-produced death sentence that had rolled off an assembly line thousands of kilometers away. And that sentence had already been passed. By the spring of 1945, the laughter had faded completely. It was replaced by a dull, hopeless silence, the kind you find at the funeral of an entire army. The German veterans who had survived Stalingrad and the Kursk Bulge, men who had faced death hundreds of times, encountered an enemy they could not comprehend, an enemy that broke all the laws of war as they knew them. They had prepared for a war of armies. Instead, they faced a war of factories. Albert Speer, the Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, the man who tried until the very end to squeeze the impossible out of German industry, would write a phrase in his memoirs after the war that sounds like an epitaph. "Our concept of superiority in quality was shattered on the rock of American superiority in quantity. The Allies did not defeat us on the battlefield. They buried us under a mountain of their production." This is the most important video of my life because it is about recognition. A recognition won not by force of arms, but by the hum of the assembly line. The German generals, some of the best tacticians in world history, found themselves in the role of knights trying to fight the plague. They could win a duel, kill one enemy, a second, a 10th, but they could not stop the epidemic. The story of the M18 is not a story about a tank. It is a story about a civilization. A civilization that mass-produced not just cars or refrigerators. It mass-produced victory. The German genius created unique, almost bespoke masterpieces, Tigers, Panthers, Me-262 jet fighters. Each of these machines was a breakthrough, a technological marvel. But a marvel that cannot be reproduced 1,000 times is worthless in a total war. It becomes an exhibit for a future museum. The Americans, however, did not try to create a marvel. They created a tool. Cheap, mass-produced, and effective enough. The Hellcat was not the best tank destroyer. Its gun was inferior to the Germans. Its armor was a joke. But it had one quality that outweighed everything else. There were a lot of them. There were always more. Imagine this final chord of the war. A German crew, exhausted, hungry, in their last miraculously surviving Panther. They see one Hellcat on the horizon. They destroy it. They feel a surge of pride. But then 5 more appear behind it. And they understand. They understand that they are not fighting a crew. They are fighting an entire country 6,000 kilometers away. A country where women on factory floors work 3 shifts to assemble these tin cans, which then cross the ocean on thousands of ships and pour onto the front in an endless stream. They understood that their enemy was not a soldier. Their enemy was logistics itself. Field Marshal Walter Model, one of the most talented German commanders, known for his mastery of defense, once told his officers, "He who has more artillery and more tanks will win in the end. Everything else is romanticism." He understood it too late. The story of the Hellcat is a cold shower for anyone who believes in wonder weapons, in the idea that one brilliant breakthrough, one perfect tank or plane can change the course of a war. World War II proved the opposite. It was not won by genius. It was won by the machine tool. It was not won by the best soldier. It was won by the best organizer. The final metaphor is born of itself. The Hellcat is not just a machine. It is the physical embodiment of American doctrine.
It is a mass-produced death sentence to the idea that quality always beats quantity. No, in total war, quantity becomes a quality all its own. This machine did not just drive on the roads of Europe, it rolled on the laws of statistics. Every shot it fired was backed by thousands of tons of steel in warehouses. Every maneuver it made was supplied by millions of gallons of fuel in tankers. Every lost tank was immediately replaced by a new one because the assembly line in Michigan did not even notice the loss. When the last Tiger was burned and the last Panther ran out of fuel, the war did not end. It simply became obvious. The German soldier did not lose to the American soldier. The German engineer did not lose to the American engineer. An entire philosophy of war based on elitism, complexity, and technological perfection lost to a philosophy of mass, simplicity, and ruthless efficiency. The Hellcat was not a knight. It was an executioner who came to carry out a sentence passed not by a tribunal, but by industrial statistics. And when the smoke cleared over the ruins of Berlin, one thing became clear. The war was not won by an army. It was won by a factory that turned out to be more fearsome than any SS division. And that is the most important and most terrifying lesson of that war, a lesson that many still refuse to accept.